Hello, listeners. I think you will enjoy our conversation today, but I thought I would open with a brief description of my brief career in the pornography film business. Not at all kidding, although, is that what you think? When I was 17, I had a job as a cashier at a soft porn theater and worked there for a year before going off to college. I couldn't sell tickets or tear tickets until I turned 18. If the theater was shut down by the police, the owners wanted to make sure their underage employees didn't get carted off to jail. Soft porn in those days was everything except frontal nudity on a man. You could see women's breasts and watch simulated sex scenes, but you could not show a penis on screen. That made it hardcore. Why is this important? Well, keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles and Beth's Daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tessa's mother and also a writer. In the podcast today, we are discussing Anora. Anora has a running time of 2 hours and 19 minutes. It's rated R, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Directed by Sean Baker, who was also the writer, editor, one of the 10 producers, the casting director, and no, I guess he didn't do production design. How about that? It stars Mikey Madison, and there are a few other actors in here, but really, it's her film. Okay, so Anora is about a sex worker from Brooklyn named Anora. She's a stripper who is open to selling sex on the side. She is assigned to a new client, the young son of a Russian oligarch, who takes an interest in her. And on a whim, they fly to Las Vegas and get married. Then his oligarch parents find out, and they send their goons to force the two of them to get an annulment. But the son, whose name is Vanya or Ivan, depending on what they're calling him in any scene, he runs off immediately. So Anora spends a whole night with two of the goons trying to find him. That's actually a fairly large section of the film. They finally do find him after kind of a lot of madcap situations. And everyone is reunited with the Russian parents on a flight to Las Vegas to get the annulment, because that's where they got married when they have to get it annulled there. That's pretty much the summary of the movie.
His name is Ivan. His nickname is Vanya. This is pretty common in Russia, where a person will have one official name, but they'll have like a bunch of crazy nicknames. I remember this from reading The Brothers Karamazov.
Oh.
The main character was named Alexei, but for most of the book, he's called Alyosha. They do a lot of nicknames in Russia.
Sasha is a name that you hear a lot for as a nickname.
For boys.
Brishnikov is called Sasha sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had a friend in grade school whose name was Alexandra, and she went by Sasha. So
yeah. She had a complicated relationship with that because her father wanted to call her Sasha because he wanted a boy. Sasha is considered a boy's name. In Russia. And so she did not really like being called Sasha, but yes.
So the film is rated R. I did just a little bit of research on this, and apparently we stopped rating movies X in 1990. And since that time, if it's a hardcore pornography film, or if there's the kind of violence in it that young people would be disturbed by, or anybody would be disturbed by, they give it an NC-17 rating, but that's pretty much the kiss of death for a film. So so a lot of times they'll give the rating, and then the filmmakers will come back and say, no, what do we have to change to get an R? Because nobody will go. But you know what? This was an NC-17 film. There was full frontal nudity. There were active sex scenes.
A lot of active sex scenes.
A lot of active sex scenes, yeah. And the thing is, we've changed as a culture, because when you can see Jason Segel in a television episode in Shrinking, fully frontal nude, you can see him, and that's a television show, then what does hardcore even mean anymore? We've just really changed. We're just in a different era of visual entertainment. So I can see why they rated it R, but honestly, there's no way I would let my child under the age of 18 see this. So that's just me.
for me, I'm much less bothered by explicit sex scenes than I am by, excessive violence.
Yeah, that's true. Me too.
I mean, I do think that, and, we'll talk about this a lot more. The sex scenes in this movie. So Anora is a sex worker, and it is part of her job to appeal to the male gaze and to make sex entirely about men. So I will say that the sex scenes in this movie, I do not think should be viewed as representative of like a healthy, equal sex life. They are clearly just for Vanya's sake.
When they actually are having sex, not just the lap dances, it's kind of brutal. I mean, he's really hitting her hard sometimes. And
he's like a jackhammer.
It's boring. He's what?
He's like a jackhammer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's boring. I guess what I was trying to sort of politely say, it's not good sex. It does not look like good sex. And I think one of the potential dangers of someone too young seeing this movie, especially someone who has consumed a lot of porn, is coming away from it thinking that that's what sex should be like, and it really shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, for film that is pretty much a lot about sex, the sex in it is pretty awful. So
there is that one scene where she kind of tells him that they're not having good sex, but it's such a short scene.
Except for that scene, and he's pretty young. She's 2 years older than him, so I think at that point she decides maybe I should teach him something because he doesn't seem to be enjoying it, and it's just. Brutal is the only word I can come up with. So she gets him to slow down and tells him it'll be more enjoyable if you slow down. And he has no concept of that.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of sex that is like, it's like he's treating it like it's not really different from masturbation. And that is not a good way to engage with sex. It's not only selfish, it's also you're missing out on the whole point. Like if you just wanted to masturbate, you could just masturbate. Yeah, there's no connection
between the two of them. But it's indicative of his whole lifestyle. I mean, his whole lifestyle is just kind of shallow and brutal. He's always getting high or getting drunk and
instant gratification.
It's just decadent.
But decadent in a way that feels kind of boring and empty.
It is completely empty, yeah. And there's no appreciation for anything other than, dancing and brutal sex. I think I was 30 minutes into the film when I texted Tess and said, this is so boring, I don't know if I can finish it. And you had the same reaction.
I had a very similar reaction. The beginning of the film feels weirdly boring. There's kind of this long montage. So like we said, it starts with Anora as a sex worker. The opening shot is a shot of her working in a strip club, and we see her. I think she is doing a lap dance in the opening shot, and then we see her kind of soliciting men for other lap dances. We see her doing this work, and it was kind of interesting to watch because I feel like there was an attempt to portray it somewhat neutrally, but it still felt to me like the whole scene was centered around the male gaze. And to a certain extent, I'm not sure how you don't do that if you're trying to film, female sex workers, because a big part, especially strippers, their whole job is essentially to appease the male gaze. And then she gets paired up with Vanya. She's chosen to entertain him because he asks for someone who can speak Russian. She speaks Russian with an accent, but she does understand it. So she doesn't like talking and she doesn't like speaking in Russian because she's embarrassed of her accent, but she can understand it. This is something that she tells him, and she can speak it.
Her grandmother was Russian.
Yeah, her grandmother was Russian and never learned English, so the only way for her to talk to her was in Russian. And then he takes a liking to her, and he ends up engaging her for a week of partying. And then we get this really long montage of life with Vanya. And it's basically fast cuts between them having this very not good sex and them partying and using very illicit drugs and him playing video games. And that's kind of it over and over again. He's playing video games and ignoring her, or he's having sex with her, or they're doing drugs with his small circle of friends, or they're flying off to Vegas to do all of this again, but in Vegas. Sometimes they're in a pool. And the only conversation that you hear any of them having is just about the other drugs that they've done. And it's such a long montage. I thought it was a very interesting piece of filmmaking because at first it felt like the kind of filmmaking that's meant to glorify this with the fast cutting and like the lighting is good and, you know, the girls look pretty in every shot. But the longer it drags on, the more you're just like, is this it? Is this your whole life? This kind of empty repetition of drugs, sex, video games? Have you ever had a thought? Have you ever had a thought, Vanya? And the answer is kind of no.
And I'm also asking, is this the whole film? I mean, this is, at this point, is this
for
the
sure.
whole film?
Yeah, I was like, is the whole film this montage?
It's really awful. Getting back to the stuff about the film, you know, we talked about it being directed by Sean Baker. He wrote it. He was the editor. He won Academy Awards for Best Director, Best Editing, Best Writing. There was a fourth one that Best Movie, because that's a producer award. He was also the casting director. It was like it was his pet project that he needed to make this film. And do we know anything about him?
So I do know a little bit about him. I haven't actually seen his other films, but I think he's an indie director who usually makes his films that way, very low budget, where he does a lot of the work. And I think a number of his films are about sex workers. I know one of them is about two trans sex workers.
I'm sorry. I mean, have you ever said why?
I mean, I don't know that much about him. I just know this, basically, that he's an independent filmmaker who has made a lot of low-budget movies that are mostly about sex workers. I can't really tell you any more than that. I haven't seen the other movies. Like I said, one of them is about trans women who are also sex workers. I think the understanding is that he is interested in portraying a kind of rough working class lifestyle. And, you know, for a lot of women, that does mean sex work. I couldn't really tell you any more than that. I haven't even really watched interviews with him. I just know these kind of basic things about him.
Well, I don't think Anora was expected to take all these awards at the Oscars. It was a big surprise. It did win the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It wasn't really expected to win all these awards. Everyone thought that I'm Still Here would win Best Film. It did win Best Foreign Film. And most people thought it was the best film of the year, of the ones that were nominated. There were a lot of good films last year that weren't even considered, and that's always the case. But it was surprising. And Mikey Madison won Best Actress.
Yeah.
And that was another surprise. I think it was expected that Demi Moore would win for The Substance, and she did not, and that was very disappointing. And having seen this film, I have not seen The Substance, and I'm not going to. It's not my kind of film. But I do appreciate Demi Moore as an actress, and always have, and I would like to see her be able to resurrect her career, and I hope that not winning the award doesn't, you know, destroy her chances at resurrecting a career, because I think she's a very good actress. But Mikey Madison was good in this, but I don't think she was that good. I mean, she was the film. It was her film. It was also, there were some other standouts.
I think she was really good. I don't know that the film gave her that much to do outside of, you know, I mean, for so much of the film. Yeah, exactly. For so much of the film, it is her job to cater to the male gaze, and that's largely all she's doing. It feels like we only really get a peek at her interiority in the last, 20 minutes or so. And even then, kind of only in the very last few minutes when she finally breaks down and cries at the very end of the film. Up until then, so much of the performance is just her appealing to the male gaze, which she's very good at, and her, doing her job. She does have she's clearly good at, getting these men to give up their money,
She's not just beautiful. I mean, I wouldn't even say she's beautiful, but she's attractive, but she's engaging. She's flirtatious. She, like you said, it's not just the male gaze.
She's professional.
She's making herself, and she's making herself what these men want her to be. She is, when they pay for her time, she snuggles up to them, she asks them questions, and she adapts herself to what they want and need. She is their puppet. So, and that's what sex work is. You're selling your body and your personality.
She does make herself their puppet, but there's also, especially in that early scene, you can kind of tell that she is actually the one in charge, because she's going up to these men and getting them to, say, go to the ATM and get out cash.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, it's a kind of work that I don't think I could do, because so much of it is about being extroverted and like going up to men over and over again until you get the one who's going to give you the money. Like, we see her get rejected by a man who does not want a lap dance. Excuse me, I can speak. And then she just keeps going and goes on to the next guy, and eventually she gets it done.
She's a really good saleswoman.
That's it.
She finds the man that she thinks will like her, and a couple times they don't, but for the most part she chooses well, and she knows exactly the right moment to say, well, if you want a lap dance, we have to have cash, you got to go to the ATM. And then there's not just cash. Well, the lap dance is about tips, so I don't know if they pay the owners of the place for her services, but she gets tips.
Yeah, so usually there's a fee to get into the club, and then there's like a baseline fee for a lap dance, and then you can give tips on top of that.
Okay.
I mean, it can vary place to place, but usually the women are paying the club a fee to be there, and that comes out of the money that they get from the men.
Okay, that makes sense. So anyway, I think that the film really is Mikey Madison's, but there are a couple of other standouts. I liked Yura Borisov as Igor. I thought he was he was good. Interesting character. Lindsay Normington as Diamond, her rival, Her rival, it was really good. Karen Karagulian as Toros was also pretty good. He's the bad guy towards the end, I guess. The actor that gets second billing in IMDb is Paul Weissman playing Nick, and I could not even tell you who Nick was. I was trying
I think that's the guy who runs the club. I think that's her manager, which, he's in like 2 scenes.
And he's got second billing. So anyway.
Yeah, weird. Also, I might be wrong. That might not even be who it is.
I have no idea what he got second. Maybe because he's been in more movies, and most of these actors are not well known at all. I couldn't tell you another thing I've seen any of them in.
Maybe he's the dad. He might actually be the dad. I'm not sure.
He could be.
I'm not sure, but it's wild that he's getting second top billing, and I can't even tell you for sure which character he was.
Yeah. So that's kind of the basics of the film, and I didn't take a lot of notes on it. I just have questions for discussion that we can get into. I will say that the best scene, I thought, in terms of filming in the whole film, there weren't a lot of them, but there was one that struck me as really good. Towards the end of the film, when Igor is trying to keep her in the house and he ties her hands with the phone, and she is fighting like her life depends on it with these men tying her up. But at one point they fall back onto the couch and she is sitting in his lap, and visually it reminds us of the opening when she's giving lap dances. So because she's moving up and down trying to get away from him, and that was a really good, well filmed scene, I thought. But in the middle of a very frustrating scene because it's violent and she is trying to get away from them. She is hurting these men, and she is determined that they are not going to hold her prisoner. They're trying to. She said, "Yeah, you're kidnapping me. You could just hear her wanting to say, "This is America. This is not Russia. You can't do this to me." So it's an interesting scene, and we'll get back to it. But do you have anything before we start with discussion questions?
Yeah, I have a couple things. I think my favorite, it's not even really a whole scene, but my favorite kind of shot sequence is after the annulment has happened and they allow her to stay in the house. overnight. She wakes up in the bed that turns out is actually Vanya's parents' bed, but it's where they've been staying this whole time. And it's just there's a shot of her waking up, and then it cuts to she's like looking at the window that we saw before, and then it just cuts to her standing in her underwear in front of the window while the snow is coming in. And I just thought that was
that's beautiful.
A really beautiful shot, and kind of a good encapsulation of the end of her little fairy tale for a moment.
That has turned out to be pretty brutal. I mean, it's, we're talking about how sex is brutal.
It's turned out to be a lie. Yeah.
And it's turned to be a lie. My impression of the sex at the beginning of the film is that it's brutal, but her scenes with the Russian oligarchs' goons really are brutal.
Yeah.
And so here she's been through this really rough week. And, where she starts off with all this partying, he pays her a lot of money. He pays her $15,000, I think, to go to Las Vegas with him. And then she gets $10,000 to annul the marriage.
Yeah, she gets $15,000 to spend the week with him.
Yeah, to spend the week with him. And then the $10,000. She's walking away with some money here.
With some money,
but at the same time, it has been a difficult and brutal week. But also, like you said, she really thought she was going to get the fairy tale here, that this young boy loved her. We have no reason to believe that he ever did. He's such a shallow person. You can, from the beginning, from when he says, "Oh, let's go off to Las Vegas and let's get married," it's like, there's nothing in this young man. There's just absolutely nothing to him, and so you might marry him, but it's not going to work. I mean, and I never got the sense that she was shallow. She loved the fairy tale, and we don't know what her background is. We have to assume that she came out of a working class family and that she's not really had a lot of opportunities. But you know what? She strikes me as being really smart. And by the end of the film, I'm absolutely convinced that it's such a turning point in her life that she's going to make something of herself. But we'll get to that. Let's jump to the end of it's hard not to jump to the end of the film.
What I wanted to say is that the shot where she's staring out at the view, it's kind of this combination of, it's a beautiful shot, but it's also very bleak. I mean, it's an image of snow swirling all around her, like she's about to kind of step back out into the storm. And so for one last moment, she gets to see this view, and the view is beautiful, but it's not a warm, comforting beauty. It's cold and harmful. It's dangerous, potentially dangerous. And it's
I had a completely different take on that scene. I thought it was beautiful and comforting to her, and because snow is something
really, but she's standing almost naked in front of the. I just kept thinking she must be cold. She's, the room doesn't look very warm, and she's not under the covers for very long. Most of the scene is her standing in her underwear in front of this storm coming in. It just it looked like it was a last moment of respite.
It's not a storm; it's a gentle snow, and I just thought it was very hopeful.
It's blowing a lot. There's a lot of wind for the snow to be flurrying that much.
Well, there is, but you have to do that if you're filming it and you want to show the snow. It has to be big like that. But I did not find it to be cold. I found it to be hopeful and warm. Isn't that interesting? Completely different take on it.
Well, anyway, before we move on from the performances, I did want to say that I did see The Substance. I did watch Demi Moore's performance, and this kind of gets to my core issue with the Oscars, which is that it's interesting to talk about. The Oscars are an interesting conversation piece, but I think there's kind of a fallacy in picking a single best performance. Like, it's very weird to me to try to compare Demi Moore's performance with Mikey Madison's performance in Anora, because they're very different performances. I've heard arguments both ways. I've heard some people be really upset that Mikey Madison won because they see it as enacting, what happens in The Substance, but in real life. Because in case anyone listening doesn't know, The Substance is about a woman played by Demi Moore. The character's name is Elizabeth. I don't know if she's actually an actress, but she makes her living doing workouts. She does she leads these like workout videos on television.
Jane Fonda kind of.
Yeah, Jane Fonda-esque person. They don't really reference her specifically having acting jobs before this, but the implication is that she's a person in LA, she's famous, and she does these workout videos, and then basically the gross men who run the network decide to get rid of her because she's too old, and then someone tells her about the substance. The substance is something that kind of splits you into two people, and the second person is like a much younger version of yourself, a younger and beautiful version of yourself. It's very weird to talk about because Demi Moore is beautiful. Like, yes, she is much older than the person playing her younger self, but she's really beautiful. She's in fantastic shape. Part of my weird dissonance watching The Substance was I would love to look like Demi Moore looks. She looks fantastic. It's very weird to me to watch these scenes of her staring at herself in the mirror and hating what she sees because she looks great. Like, I mean, I don't want to speculate on what plastic surgery she's had. I understand she probably has had some because most Hollywood actresses do, but like, whatever, she looks good. Her body looks good. We see a lot of her body. And the whole crux of that movie is that she feels so bad about her quote-unquote old body that she feels the need to essentially destroy herself in order to create this younger version of herself. And the situation, of course, deteriorates over the course of the movie. I won't get too far into it, but essentially the younger version of herself takes over her old job. So, it's this literal, like, the young replacing the old kind of story. And I know a lot of people felt that Mikey Madison winning the Oscar over Demi Moore was like a real world enactment of that. I understand feeling that way for sure. I think it's a little reductive to say that it's just that because these performances were so different. On the other hand, I do think that it's not a coincidence that the one that won the Oscar is the one where a beautiful young woman spends most of her performance time appealing to the male gaze and largely naked or almost naked. Like, I think that we've got to admit that that is what is a part of this performance, and that there probably are men who were much more comfortable watching Anora than they were watching The Substance. Yeah. Where, the substance, much of the body of The Substance involves taking these feminine ideals and contorting them into grotesqueries, which is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable and is probably going to make a lot of men very uncomfortable. Now, that all being said, I do think for me personally, I did like Demi Moore's performance a little bit more. I won't say that I liked The Substance more. I had issues with the movie, but if I'm just talking about the performance, I do feel like Demi Moore was given more to do. Granted, her screen time was not as much as Mikey Madison's because there's kind of another lead in The Substance, but she really is able to do all, like, one of my complaints about The Substance, which is interestingly also one of my complaints about Anora, is that it feels like we get very little of the main character's interiority. I have a lot of questions about Demi Moore's character in The Substance. Like, she's this woman, we never know exactly how old she's supposed to be, but we know she's supposed to be over 50, and she's super wealthy, and she lives in this gorgeous apartment in Los Angeles that's like a super high rise, so it's overlooking all of Los Angeles, and somehow she has no friends, no family, no significant other. She just lives here alone and never talks to anyone, and there's no explanation as to how she has gotten to this point in her life, being this famous, gorgeous celebrity, and has no one in her life. She doesn't have an assistant, no one. So, like, I have big questions about that. And similarly, I feel like Anora, we spend so little time with her actually talking about what she wants or anything inside of her heart. She has some conversations with her one friend from the strip club, Lulu, I think her name is. But it's like 2 scenes maybe in the whole movie, and she doesn't really talk about anything other than surface level stuff. So about both of these characters, I have a lot of questions about what their interior is supposed to be. But that all being said, Demi Moore does so much to imply this really nuanced interior just with like shots of her face, shots of her reacting to things, having this kind of darkness take over her. Like, I think they're both really good performances. I did feel like I got to see a lot more interiority in what Demi Moore was allowed to do. And it felt like Mikey Madison had to spend so much of this movie playing this character whose whole job is to appeal to men and have this kind of smooth exterior, that like it ends up that most of this movie she's not really allowed to do that much with nuance, you know?
That's my biggest problem with the film, is we don't know anything about Anora, and she only gets about 5 minutes. So the first hour of the film it goes from the strip club to Las Vegas to this this hedonistic lifestyle that this young Russian dude has, that she becomes a part of. And then we quickly get into about 30 minutes of trying to find him. And before we do that, because they think she knows where he is, they're tying her up and they won't let her go. And this is because the parents want them together so they can annul the marriage. And she's very combative in those scenes. And it's almost like she's frantic to not be tied up. And why is that? Any of them seem like they're going to harm her. So, but she thinks they are. She assumes they are. So there must be something in her backstory that makes her afraid of being tied up. We don't know. They don't tell us. They don't tell us anything about her. And then we quickly get to the annulment, and then the last 5 to 10 minutes of the film, we get a little bit of her true personality coming out.
Yeah.
She has a conversation with Igor, and they do end up having sex that seems to actually be a connection kind of sex at the end. But that's like 10 minutes of the film. We get to see the real Anora, and that's it. So this is a film about a woman as an object of whatever, men's fascination, their fantasies, beauty. It's an extreme story. It sounds like The Substance is too. It's a very extreme story, but we're not getting any character study in this. We're not getting any character development, and it sounds like in The Substance as well, in either of these women. And I think it's okay to compare the two films, because we did talk about this being our Oscar episode, but we really haven't, either one of us had the opportunity to see a lot of the films. So comparing these two is really good. I waited too long to see the two Oscar-nominated movies that I wanted to see, and they're gone from the theaters, and I have to wait for them to come out on streaming. But I hate that I don't know anything about Anora. It just seems to me like this is a film made by a man. He's trying to make a point, but how do you make a point about somebody's life if you don't tell us anything about her? We don't know anything about her. How can this be a quote-unquote feminist film when we don't have any idea about why is she doing this? Does she have no other options? Did she go to college? She seems pretty smart to me. Did she not go to college? Did her parents abandon her? What is her backstory? I think we tend to think in this country, at least, and those of us who are feminists, I think we tend to think that women who end up in these kinds of jobs, these careers, because this is a career for women, they take it seriously, they protect themselves, there are guidelines. So it's a real career for them. How do they get there? How do they get into these roles? And she doesn't seem, none of the women who are doing these seem to be, drug addicts. I mean, they use drugs, but they don't seem to be addicted.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is an intentional choice. I do think that the film, because we do have these narratives in America in particular, that people who are sex workers are either they're doing it to work their way through school, or they're doing it because they're addicted to drugs, and so they're spending all this money and they use sex work to pay for that, or they were abused as children or whatever. We have a lot of negative stories around why people do sex work. And our most positive one is the idea that, a woman is doing it to, or a man is doing it to work their way through school. That's sort of our positive idea of sex work. And I do think that the film is trying to not fall into any one of those stereotypes. That would be my guess anyway, that it's trying to show sex work. Yeah, it's trying to show sex work as just a job like any other job. And I think that in itself is admirable. I do think that we need to accept that sex work is work. I am a person who thinks that sex work should be legal. And I think that there should be way more protections for sex workers than there currently are.
Yes, I agree.
You know, and I have a lot of respect for people who do sex work. A lot of it is really hard, especially if you're, I mean, like little personal anecdote, I take pole dance classes, so I know firsthand how hard pole dance is. It's really hard. You have to be really strong to lift yourself up on a pole and be able to do a lot of the moves that
and she does it.
That strippers can do. Yeah.
She has a scene where she does the pole dance. Yeah.
Yeah, she has a scene where she does a dance, and it, you know, it is real athleticism. And so like I respect sex workers, and I respect the film for trying to not fall into any one of these kind of stereotype stories about sex workers. But that being said, there is a point where, you know, we really don't know anything about her background. Like,
no, nothing.
We know that her mom lives in Florida. I guess there's like one line about how her mom lives in Florida.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And she has a roommate. Her roommate is her sister?
I believe her roommate is her sister. Yes.
Yeah.
And they seem to live in New York. There's one point where they're dealing with the NYPD. So this film, I couldn't tell for much of it if it was supposed to take place in New York or New Jersey, but it seems to be New York. But apart from that, we see so little of her relationship with her sister. They literally have 2 scenes together, and each of those scenes are like less than a minute long. There's a scene where her sister asks if she's gotten the milk, and she says no. And then there's a scene where she's leaving the apartment she shares with her sister to go be with Vanya, and her sister's like, "So you're just going to be gone for a week?" And she's like, "Yep." And that's it. That's all we see of her relationship with her sister.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, like, she's chosen to live with her sister, so you would think that this must be a fairly important relationship to her, because they chose to live together, and they both live somewhere where their mother doesn't. So either their mother moved to Florida at some point, or they together moved up to New York from Florida. We never know. We never really know what she thinks about her parents. We don't know why she chose to do sex work. We don't know if it's just like she thought it seemed cool. You know, maybe she took a pole class and really liked it and decided to keep going. There's no indication that she has any drug addiction, which I think is good. Like, I think it's a good part of her character that she's not addicted to drugs. I think I would feel much worse about this movie if she did fall into one of these stereotyped stories about sex workers.
Yeah.
But I still feel like I want to know more about who she is as a person. What does she want out of life? Does she want to do sex work forever? Is that what she enjoys doing? Or does she want to do something else at some point?
She is pulled into this lifestyle with this guy so easily and so readily. That poses a big question for me. How does that happen? How does she just, get pulled into doing this stuff with him, going to his apartment? I mean, I realize she sells sex on the side. And that's how she first gets involved with him. She, he pays for her as an escort, and that's why she has sex with him. And that continues for a while. And then then he pays her for the whole week. But she just so readily and without question gets pulled into his lifestyle, his hedonistic lifestyle. You got to wonder.
Yeah.
And it's not that she doesn't seem to, I mean, she enjoys it, but she doesn't seem to be that happy. She, there's one scene where they're sitting on the couch and he's playing video games. She just kind of snuggles into him. Yeah. And there's no conversation. And it's hard to tell what she wants from him at that point. And whether she understands that he is never going to be able to give her anything other than money. Because he just doesn't seem to have that much going on intellectually. And although by the end of the film, there's a little bit of a flip here. I love these films where there's a flip towards the end. And you begin to see that he really does have more of a personality than we thought he did. But they don't go very far with it. So we never really know. But
and I don't know, is that personality anything more than him just like hating his parents?
But at least it's something. At least he's not, just playing video games and having sex and taking drugs. I mean, it's he's having a conversation with his parents. It's an angry one. And you see a personality there. That's the first time. in this entire film, that we see anything come out of him that isn't just this ridiculous, oh, I'm just going to have fun every day of my life, you know? So, but how does she get pulled into that? What is the attraction to her? We don't know, because we don't know anything about her.
And I think that's one of the questions. I would be fine with this movie if it was saying that she likes being a stripper, she likes this work, she likes being a sex worker, and that's what she wants to do. But if that's what she wants to do, why is she so easily seduced to be this stupid little boy's wife? Because there's nothing about him that's particularly charming. And this is actually one of the points that I wanted to bring up.
That's a good point. He is not charming.
He's not
attractive. And he's got a little boy's body. You notice
that? Exactly.
He's really tiny.
Yeah, he strikes me as a little boy, both physically and mentally. Mm-hmm. Like, I know he's supposed to be 21, but we see him naked a lot in the movie, and he's very skinny. He looks like a little boy. And I don't mean that to like body shame him. I just mean that between that and how immature he acts, how his whole life is just instant gratification nonstop over and over again, he feels like he's a 12-year-old boy to me for so much of it. And one of the points that I wanted to make is that I did keep viewing this movie as something of a response to the film Pretty Woman, which I don't know if that was intentional. That was just kind of one of the ways that I could make sense of it, because we see so little of Anora's interiority. I just sort of had to tell myself, maybe she has just kind of internalized the Pretty Woman story. Now, if anyone has not seen Pretty Woman and doesn't know the story, I will just do a brief synopsis. It's been a very long time since I've seen it. I didn't rewatch it before we recorded, but it stars Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. And Julia Roberts plays a sex worker who I believe is very new to sex work. She has like just come to a big city. It may be LA. I don't remember. It's been a really long time. But she's just come to the big city, and she's been a streetwalker, as we called them then, which is a prostitute who literally walks the street and looks for potential clients. And she's been doing that for a very brief amount of time when she gets solicited by Richard Gere's character, who is this wealthy, sophisticated man, and he wants her to basically pretend to be his girlfriend for a week or so, and he's going to buy her a bunch of fancy dresses so she can come to fancy parties with him as his girlfriend, as his quote-unquote fake girlfriend. And of course, he's super rich, super charming. Apparently, a lot of women are really into Richard Gere. I've never gotten it, but Richard Gere is quote-unquote attractive. So he's this charming, attractive, rich man, and he falls in love with her immediately. And it's a love story.
Well,
it's a story about...
Who would not fall in love with Julia Roberts? She's charismatic and gorgeous.
Yes, for sure. And they have great chemistry together, and it's this lovely, cute little rom-com.
But it's not real.
But it's a fairy tale. It's extremely unrealistic, both in that this woman has barely done any sex work and immediately gets picked up by a rich man. Like, that in itself is really unrealistic. But also, the rich man himself is really unrealistic. Most rich people today are like Vanya. They are the children of rich people who have never really had to work, who have lived this life of instant gratification. They are not charming, they are not cool, and they're not good people. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're just looking for their own next fix. And that's Vanya. I think she is seeing him like he's her Richard Gere, but in reality, he's got the mentality of a 12-year-old, and he is seeing her as the fun thing to do this week. And unfortunately, he asks her to marry him, which is also just a whim that he has, and she takes that to be serious. Which, like, she has very little reason not to, but I kind of, in my head, had to think to myself, yeah, if you've grown up with the Pretty Woman story in your head, and you are this beautiful young woman, she is this beautiful young woman who is doing sex work, and a part of you has thought in the back of your mind that maybe someday some rich guy will come along and like you so much that he marries you and takes you into the upper class. I feel like that is more what seduced her than Vanya himself. It's that idea. And so I see a lot of the movie as this kind of response to Pretty Woman, as this sort of counter. Here is the more realistic version of how that story would go.
Well, it's a Cinderella story. There are two movies, actually, and I think you're right. The Julia Roberts movie is maybe more appropriate for our discussion because she is a sex worker. But I mean, it's also a Pygmalion story with Pretty Woman, because he really does turn her into a socialite kind of person. But at the beginning of the film, she's wearing kind of sexy, dirty kind of clothes, and towards the end, she looks very preppy. So there's definitely a Pygmalion component to that. There's not in this movie. But the film that I was thinking about last night or yesterday when I was watching this was Made in Manhattan. So that's Jennifer Lopez and Ralph
Fiennes.
Thank you. Ralph Fiennes. And that's a little more realistic Cinderella story, and I like it a little bit better. I mean, I love Pretty Woman, but I love Julia Roberts. I will go see her in anything. I will love her till the day I die. I think she's just one of my favorite actresses. But that, Pretty Woman is a fairy tale. Made in Manhattan is a little bit better in how it handles this story. And she's not a sex worker. There's a lot of respect for the woman in Made in Manhattan. She's a hotel. She cleans rooms in a hotel. And she somehow, it's a case of mistaken identity, kind of like in Cinderella. And, he comes to believe that she's a wealthy woman because she's trying on a wealthy woman's clothes in the hotel room when she's supposed to be working. Then he takes her out and, anyway, it all kind of falls apart at the end, but they do fall in love. But she's got substance. Her character, she's raising a son. She's working really hard to try and move up into management. She's smart. And, he is a politician. He comes from a family of politicians and a family of money. So it's got that Cinderella component to it. He's the prince. But he also respects her intelligence, and he can see that in her. She's not a wallflower. She's not a flat character. She's a real person. And I think that film probably does the Cinderella story better than any other film. This is a warped, wicked version of Cinderella. And I kind of love that about it, because Cinderella is a stupid story that women have been fed since, I don't know when the story came out, in the early 20th century, but it's like,
I think it's older than that.
But I don't know anything about the origins of the story, but it's a ridiculous story, and women cling to it, or did cling to it for decades until they realized they could do it for themselves. They don't need no man.
I mean, I think what's depressing is that I think there has been, and this is where I'm going to turn like hard feminist and start talking today politics. I think what I like about the story is also what is depressing about it. What I like about the story is that I do think it is this kind of response to Pretty Woman. It is a very clear depiction of how this would go in the real world. I think Vanya is a very realistic character. And I think Anora is too. I think they're both very realistic characters.
They are.
And I think what's depressing to me about this movie is that I think probably a lot of young women should see this movie. I think a lot of young women today, there has been this whole rise of trad wives on TikTok. I don't know if you've followed this at all.
What is that?
But okay, so oh boy. So a trad wife, it's short for traditional wife, but it kind of has its own meaning. It's like the alt-right for girls. It's these largely young women who are very attractive and dress themselves in cute little cottagecore outfits and make TikToks about how they make bread from scratch for their 4 children and don't make their own money. Meanwhile, they're all on TikTok making money from their advertisers, but let's pretend that that's not happening. And unfortunately, they're very popular. And it's basically this attempt to sell this idea to young women that they don't need to have their own job. They just need to find a man, submit to the man, give him babies, and spend the rest of their life dressing in cute little dresses for their man and taking care of his home and his children.
That's really depressing.
It's really depressing and it's really deceptive because most of the women making this content are making money off of these TikToks. There's also kind of this weird pornographic element to it where a lot of it, you know, the women are doing this like soft voiceover and there are these shots that conspicuously have their cleavage in them and they're like showing their hands making the bread. It's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, if this was your personal kink in your marriage, that's fine. But where it kind of crosses the line is where you turn around and say that all women should be doing this, and where you try to convince young women that they need to give up their autonomy and become submissive to their men. Because fact of the matter is, for most people, that is not attainable at a minimum. And to take it a step further, for most women, that is a very bad idea. It is a bad idea to rely solely on a man who adheres to very conservative values because he may decide stuff that is not in your best interest. And if you have no income of your own and no way of getting out of there, then the second he turns abusive, and many of them will, you will have no way out. So, or even if he doesn't turn abusive, if he just turns out to be a Vanya who does not care about you and just wants to spend his time getting his own his every desire immediately met and has no concept of consequences or the humanity of other people, you don't want to be in a long-term relationship with that person. You don't want your survival to be dependent on that person. So the depressing thing is, I do think this movie is very relevant for a lot of young women. And we should talk about, you know, the wealth involved as well, because it's not just a gendered message. But one of the messages of this movie is that for young women who think that all they need to do is cater to a man and make their whole life about a man, that is not going to work out for you well in the long run, because the men who are into that are men who don't care about you. They only care about themselves.
And, you know, so I have a lot of discussion questions that revolve around everything you just said. So my first question is, do we think this is a feminist film?
Unfortunately, I think it is. I don't think it's...
It kind of is, yeah.
I don't think it's a very complex feminist film.
No, I don't think it's a very good feminist film. But I do think it makes a point, and you just described that. So
it's like the first level of feminism. Honestly, watching this film, I kept getting a little bit irritated at everyone who called Barbie Feminism 101. This film is Feminism 101. This is the basic feminist principle that making your entire life revolve around a man is a bad idea. That's Feminism 101. Barbie is a much more complicated feminist message, I think.
But even for a sex worker, if they start to tie her up against her will and she's fighting back at them because she feels like they're kidnapping her, they're taking away her liberty, they're telling her what she has to do. And that's very much I don't know if that's a Russian thing or a wealthy thing, or what the filmmaker wants us to think about that. Is this just because these are wealthy people, or is it because they're Russians and they think it's okay? He doesn't really, that doesn't really come through for me, but they do it. Whether or not, whatever their reasoning is, they are holding her against her will, which in this country is against the law. And she fights them tooth and nail to get away from them. And she finally does get them to undo her bonds, but they don't let her go.
Yeah. My take is that it's a wealthy person thing, and I actually kind of think it's a bit of a mistake on the filmmaker's part to make them Russian, because I think you can come away from this thinking it's just a Russian thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but I don't think it is just a Russian thing. I mean, I do think we need to talk about the fact that Russian oligarchs have increasing influence in America, because that is a problem.
But, they're not gangsters either. That's the other thing is, you could, and actually there were points in that part of the film where they're in the house and they're holding her against her will, and the guy's on the phone with the parents, and they're talking. That kind of reminds me of all those tongue-in-cheek gangster films of the 80s and 90s, where the gangsters are trying to pull off something for their bosses, and they keep messing it up, and it's kind of like a Keystone Cops, not quite that bad, but they're kind of idiots. She never seems to be in danger. I don't think she's ever in danger. The filmmaker is not trying to make us think that they're going to kill her. That is never part of this. These people are wealthy. They did not come to this country to kill off sex workers. They came to this country to make more money.
But I think what's happening is that these wealthy people who are kind of exemplified by the character Toros, just think that they can order people around and people will comply, and Anora will not comply.
The parents are like that too. And in fact, she tries to introduce herself to the mother, thinking, oh, this is my mother-in-law. I should introduce myself. And she is rejected. And the woman is haughty with her and insulting and tries to put her in her place. Doesn't really succeed, but thinks she succeeded. And that's definitely an upper class, every country upper class person's thinking that you are not as good as me because I have money.
And I think it's all coming from the parents. It's just that most of the film, Toros is like our representative of that.
Yeah, he is. He's running things. And it's funny too, because when we are introduced to him, he's standing in church at what looks to be a baptism. He has to interrupt everything and leave that because his bosses, these oligarch parents who need him to get these super young people and get them annulled. And first they think they're going to do it in New York, and they realize, no, they got married in Las Vegas. We got to go back to Nevada because you have to do it in the state where they were married. So then he's kind of running that operation. But he makes mistake after mistake after mistake. First, he allows them to tie up Anora with the telephone cord. Yep. And by the way, who has a telephone in their house anymore with a telephone cord?
Yeah, that was weird.
That was weird. They tie her up with that, and he doesn't tell them to untie her. And then, he parks his car someplace where it gets towed. And the whole thing is just, he's just making mistake after mistake.
Well, and I think that's part of why I see him as being the representative of the kind of machinations of the wealthy people, because it feels like all of these mistakes stem from his certainty that he's going to get what he wants, that he can control every situation. With Anora, first he doesn't think she needs to be tied up because he thinks she's just going to submit to him because he says so, and then she turns out to have much more spirit and drive than that, and does try to escape, because Igor is the one who ties her up initially, and he's kind of the only one who's like, we have to restrain her or she's going to run away.
He gets her. He understands her right away.
Yeah. And then Toros also like kind of unnecessarily antagonizes her by ripping the ring off of her finger, which was completely unnecessary. Like, first of all, you could have let her keep the ring, and like that's going to be no skin off of your back. And second, she has already proven that she's willing to fight you guys. I think she's the one who gives the other goon a concussion, right?
Yeah, like, she hurts all of them. All three.
Yeah, she hurts all of them, and she's already done that when he decides to rip the ring off of her finger. Like, he's so assured of his own authority that he refuses to admit that she is this kind of little force of nature who is going to be a problem for him if he doesn't start respecting her. But he just keeps not. And then the same thing with the laws. And it's not just her, right? When they park in that no parking zone, he clearly just thinks he can just do whatever he wants because he's a representative of these rich people and their needs come before anybody else's. So I feel like the reason that I think he did not actually need to leave the christening is that he clearly puts his job above all else. And that includes the way that he interacts with all of society. He thinks because these rich people are who they are, they get to just do whatever they want, and that extends to him. He gets to do whatever he wants.
That's kind of what's happening in this country right now, and I'm just going to say this out loud, that the wealthy people in this country think they can just do whatever they want right now because they have somebody in the White House who agrees with them, who thinks that wealthy people should be able to do whatever they want, and that is definitely what's going on here. I don't think he's disguising that at all. But I do want to just make a real quick point, because you mentioned her hurting the three guys, the goons who were trying to keep her, in the house until they could get the annulment. When she hits that guy in the head with her feet, she concusses him. And it's a running gag for the rest of the film that he is suffering seriously. And they never take him to the hospital. I mean, he could have a brain bleed. They, he's like, they have to pull over and let him throw up at one point.
Yeah, he vomits repeatedly.
He is really badly concussed, and they never take care of it. He passes out at one point. I realize that's a running gag for the filmmaker, but I don't think that's very funny.
No, I found it very disturbing, and I really wanted them to take him to the hospital.
It wasn't a priority. The only priority was getting this marriage annulled. And I realize that when you want an annulment, there is a time limit. You have to do it within a certain amount of time, but it's not like 24 hours.
Yeah.
They could have taken him to the hospital. So anyway, I do think this is an indictment of the wealthy class. It's also an indictment of that hedonistic decadent lifestyle, in the clubs, the drugs, the shallowness. We see the club life in a lot of movies these days. And I mean, this has been happening for probably 5 or 10 years now. And it's always, and maybe in its TV shows too, where they want to show young people having fun. They go to a club where people are dancing to music that is really just, it's made in machines. It's not played by musicians. There's no lyrics. They're just jumping up and down with lights flashing. That is a scene I see in a lot of movies and a lot of TV shows. And it's distressing to me because is it real? Is that really what young people are doing these days? And there's some older people in it too, but I don't get that. Is that really a thing right now? You're a young person, so I'm asking you.
I'm not that young.
You're in this age group, though.
I mean, I have experienced what you are talking about. Every person's experience is different. I will say when I was in my 20s, I did experience some of that club life. But my specific experience was generally that a bunch of us would get ready together in an apartment, and that was part of the fun, was us kind of doing our makeup together and, helping each other pick out what to wear. Often leaving the house at like 10 p.m. or later and then going to a club that would be pretty similar to that, flashing lights. I mean, I went to a lot of gay clubs.
Right, yeah.
Because like I live in Seattle, a lot of the clubs when I was in my 20s just were gay clubs, and certainly the ones where you were less likely to be assaulted by strange men. So went to a lot of gay clubs, and there was definitely plenty of like pulsing music and usually some strobe lights. But usually that wasn't the end of the night. Like, we would go out to the club and dance for a couple of hours, and then we would usually come back to somebody's apartment. I had a friend who had like a really big living room, so we would usually go to his apartment, and then the last hour or two of the night would be not exactly quiet because we'd all be pretty drunk, but, a quieter hangout where people were just, talking in an apartment, maybe playing some music, maybe playing some games, or, the traditional white guy brings out his guitar and plays Wonderwall. That definitely happened a couple of times. But, so there was kind of a progression. Like, this starts in an apartment where we all get ready together, then we go to a club for a while, then we go back to somebody's apartment and maybe drink some more, or maybe just talk to strangers or whatever. And I feel like what I noticed was missing from that montage was the talking. No one was like talking about anything. Like when we would go back to these apartments, we would talk about everything. We would talk about politics, books we'd read. Like, there were real discussions happening there. I'm not saying that we were like scholars or anything. It certainly wasn't in like a collegial environment. But, most of my friends were educated, and most of us had opinions on politics and movies and TV shows. We all watched Game of Thrones together. Sometimes we would just be screaming about Game of Thrones at the end of the night.
Right.
Certainly a lot of my friends are nerds. I will happily admit that. I am also a nerd, but it just feels like without that element, everything seems so much emptier, Oh, also we would always be eating pizza at the end of the night. Where was the pizza in this
probably
montage?
Ordered food. But also when you're in these clubs, you can't have a conversation. It's too loud.
Exactly.
So you have to go somewhere if you want to talk. Yeah.
Yeah. And like usually in the course of going to the clubs, like we would often hit up more than one. So there would be walking in between places, and you get to talk while you walk.
Yeah.
So it just felt like that the camaraderie and the conversation was like totally missing from this depiction of going out to these clubs. And to me, without that, it all becomes very empty.
That's exactly it. I think in a lot of the scenes in the first half of this movie where they're in clubs or they're in the pool and they're drinking and doing drugs or wherever they are, there's no conversation happening.
Mm-hmm.
They are not talking about anything. It's just, I don't know. And there's not even music a lot of times except when in the clubs.
It's like it's all physical gratification and nothing else. So I watched this a little more than 24 hours ago, I guess about 48 hours ago. And my partner and I have been talking about it on and off. I think he disliked the movie even more than I did. I wouldn't say that I disliked it. I think he actually disliked much of his experience of watching the movie. He was definitely bothered by the fact that we have no idea what Anora wants in life. And the more that we talked about it, the more that I just kept thinking, it just feels like this movie is just for young people and not for anyone who has experienced any more life than what you've experienced in your 20s. Because I feel like part of what bothers me about the ending is that it almost feels like it doesn't quite go far enough in the lesson. Like, Anora learns the lesson that these wealthy, rich guys are not going to save her. But because it's such an extreme situation, she kind of doesn't learn the more prevalent lesson of you cannot make your whole life about a man, because that will in itself create an unequal relationship. Because like the thing is, like, I do remember when I was younger, I never really wanted to be in a relationship like this, but I knew a lot of young women who did kind of buy into this idea that when they're in a relationship, they need to make that man the entire center of their world, and they needed to make everything about him. And that included if he was a guy like Vanya, who was pretty selfish and didn't really reciprocate any of these actions. And I feel like part of what's bothersome about the ending is that she gets such an extreme version of this that we don't see the version of the story where a young woman like this is in this relationship with Vanya and it doesn't abruptly end because of his parents, but instead she's in this drawn-out relationship with this guy who never changes and never does anything for her and never reciprocates. And we don't see the much slower and subtler tragedy of that, because that can only end in so many ways. Eventually, that girl is gonna grow up. Eventually, she's gonna realize that she wants something more from her partner. If she's lucky, she has that realization before they've had any children, and she gets out. But there are plenty of young women who have been in relationships like that, who have had children, and then had to realize, oh, this guy is not gonna help me raise our children. This guy is going to continue to be this man-child, and now we have children together, and I'm bound to him forever. Because once you have children with someone, you cannot extricate yourself from them.
You can't assume a man's going to grow up because you have a child with him. Yeah.
Exactly. So it just felt like, I'm not sure what woman over 30 still needs to learn this lesson. I do think plenty of women in their early 20s should watch this movie, but I think it's kind of limited to that. Most women who are 30 and over have already had this realization, or on the tragic end of things, they haven't, and they're still enslaving themselves to this dude who is incredibly selfish and childish and does not pull his own weight in the relationship.
I do think she learns a lot from this experience, though. I have a more optimistic sense of the ending than you do. And maybe it's because I'm older. I'm not sure, but I do feel like she makes a decision to agree to the annulment. Now, there is just a slight hint that they would do physical violence to her if she doesn't agree to the annulment. But mostly it's that the mother threatens her. You know, she says, oh, I didn't sign a prenup. I don't want an annulment. I want a divorce. And then what does the mother threaten her with?
She threatens to take all her money. She says, like, what little you have, we will take. It will be gone.
Because they could afford better divorce lawyers.
Yeah, okay. For sure.
So that's why she realizes the wisdom of that. So she does have to think about it a minute. But I think she realizes her power. She at some point decides they have the upper hand in terms of the situation. But they don't have the upper hand on her. Which is why when she's tied up, she never stops fighting. And I really think that's an important scene, because at first I'm like, why don't you stop? Why don't you stop fighting him? You're just going to hurt yourself, you know, and she doesn't. She never stops fighting. The entire time she is tied up with that phone, she is outraged that he has tied her up.
Yeah.
And that's good. That is her discovering her power. It's a really good thing. And she should be outraged. I think most women would just calm down and assume that if they calm down that they would be released. But Anora knows that she's not going to be released, because they need her to go to court and get the marriage annulled, and they are not going to let her go until that's done. And she is just determined, at least in this scene, that she's going to talk to Vanya before she agrees to anything, because she's still under the impression that he wants to stay married to her. Once she sees him and he says, no, it was just a game, we have to get it annulled. She's pissed about that too. Well, and who wouldn't be? But at the same time, she was a little naive for her to assume that this was going to be a real thing. This is a fairy tale. But in that scene where she's fighting the guy, where she's fighting Igor, who seems to really understand her. He's got his hands around her. He's trying to keep her calm. She's not going to calm down, but he's trying to calm her down. And he understands why she's fighting. He completely understands her. He gets her from the get-go, which is why I think at the end they're going to end up together. And that's an appropriate thing, because they do seem to get each other.
Don't know if I agree with that, in part because I'm not actually sure if Igor lives full-time in America. Does he live in Russia? He might be going back to Russia.
I think this is their crew in America. This is the impression I got.
Maybe.
They work for Toros, who lives in New York.
Yeah, maybe.
So, I mean, I don't know. I just thought that they had a connection. And it was because that he understood her and why she was fighting. He understood that she didn't feel helpless, so he had to, because she was going to get away from him. She was determined.
Yeah.
So
I do think that he's the only character who shows her any real empathy during the story.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say that they have a full connection.
It might not be permanent, but I do think there's a connection.
I more see it as they're on the same level in terms of like they're both the working class characters. So I more see it as like they kind of have this class solidarity. They come from a similar background, and they are the people who are being used by the oligarchs. They're the people who are always going to lose in this situation.
And maybe that's why he sees her as a human being. And none of these other people do. Vanya doesn't see her as human. He just sees her as something to use.
Yeah.
Toro sees her as a problem. The parents see her as a problem.
Yeah.
But he sees her. And so that, I think that's a real hopeful part of the ending of the film. I'm not sure what the future is for either of them, but I do feel like she has found her power, and whether or not she decides to use that to make a better life for herself, we don't know, because we don't know enough about her.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree that I think there is something hopeful about the ending, but I think to me there's also something subtly cynical about the ending where he gives her the ring back. So at some point he must have taken the ring back from Toros after Toros wrestled it away from her, and he gives it back to her. So she does end the movie with the $15,000 that she made initially, the $10,000 that she made from the divorce, and then he also gives her the ring. And that's all very nice, but to me there's just something so kind of dark about ending it on this note of, well, here, you get this other thing of monetary value. It just felt like for a moment, like we just reduced everything to how much money she made off of this.
But you know what? I was pulled into that, because I'm sitting there thinking, how much money is she going to get for this? Because she's been through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
And she's been through the ringer, and they should pay her more than what they're offering.
Yeah.
$10,000 to me sounded like a drop in the bucket for these people.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And why wasn't she negotiating for a little bit more? And so she deserves the ring.
Like, I'm not saying that she doesn't deserve the ring. I guess I'm just saying, like, so much of this movie, it felt like was an indictment of how shallow late stage capitalism is, and how shallow it makes all of us. And then to end the film on, well, at least she also got to keep the ring, which she can sell for more money.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying she doesn't deserve it. I do think she deserves to be paid for what she went through, because we do live in capitalism and we cannot pretend that we don't. And also, like, he might have lost her job. Like, we don't know if she's going to be able to get her job back after everything that happened. So, she does deserve that. It's just that it feels like that's all we get. And at the end, it just feels like all of human connection has been boiled down to its monetary value. And that depressed the hell out of me. I found the ending very depressing. And I guess it's partly because I don't think that Anora and Igor have no connection, but I don't think they really know each other. They're just like, I do think that Igor is kind of the most likable character, because he seems to be the only person who has human empathy and who sees her as a person. But to me, that's kind of an effect of the fact that he is this working class person who has probably seen a fair amount of working class people getting screwed over by the oligarchs of the world, by the rich people, and now he's watching it happen to her.
He's very real. I get a sense of him from the moment we meet him. He's just very real. He's empathetic. He's more real and more empathetic than Anora is. Yeah. Anora seems to be a very shallow person for most of the movie. You know, she's got this job where she's just basically, you know, entertaining men until he wraps her up with the phone cord. And that seems to bring out, I don't know what it brings out of her, but it certainly brings out her sense of survival. She wants to get away. And we just see more in her in that scene than we see anywhere else in the movie. Yeah. Except at the very end where she's looking at the snow, which to me is a very thoughtful scene and a little bit more, I think it's warmer than you think it is, but I feel like she's looking at the snow and thinking, what's the future hold for me? And maybe trying to make sense of what's happened to her. And it's a lot, and in a very short amount of time. She's gone from being the striptease dancer, sex worker woman who is just, you know, has a kind of a simple life and just parties with people for a living, to being basically kidnapped and then rung through the ringer with a set of probably pretty powerful Russian oligarchs. And that's a lot in a very short amount of time. Yeah. I don't know. I don't like this film very much. I think the pacing in it is just doesn't work for me. You spend half of the film boring me. Yeah. And then you put all of your punch into the last 30 minutes. Yeah. That's not a very well-paced film.
Yeah, and it does make me wonder, because, like, you and I are very similar, so it does make me wonder, did other people not find the montage really boring? Do other people find that part fun to watch? I genuinely wonder.
It's a good question. This film won Best Film of the Year at the Oscars. How the fuck did that happen? Yeah. I mean, Conclave is not a great film, but it's a better film than this one. It's nuanced and it's got, you know, really interesting scenes and writing and actors. And that one didn't win? I didn't see a lot of this. So let's talk a second about the Oscars just for a second. Yeah. I haven't had a chance to see A Complete Unknown yet, and I don't know why I've been dragging my feet on it. I'm a big Dylan fan. I think partly it's that I'm not a big fan of Timothée Chalamet. Yeah. I just don't think he was the right choice for this. I've seen the previews. I'm going to see it this week. Hulu has it starting on Thursday, and I will watch it this weekend. But the film that I really wanted to see, and I waited too late to see it because A Complete Unknown was a big film, but I'm Still Here was a Brazilian film and an independent, and it just was gone so quickly that I didn't get a chance to see it. And from what I understand, you know, from the reviews and what people I know who've seen it, it was probably the best film of the year. I can't say that because I haven't seen it, but I'm going to. And at some point in the future, maybe we can come back and discuss that one, because I think it's a film that would be worth our time. The main character is a woman. Maybe we can talk about women in film. And maybe we can bring back into the discussion a little bit Anora. But I really feel like they got it wrong this year. They don't, you know, the Oscars often get it wrong. Yeah. But they really, really got it wrong this year. I mean, this isn't just a matter of choosing between 5 good films and not making the choice that everybody wants. This is a bad film. I think that's my hot take on it.
Yeah, and I guess let's go ahead and go into hot takes. I don't know
that I go to hot takes. Go ahead.
I don't know that I want to say that it's a bad film. I do think that it has its place. So my hot take, and it's kind of a complicated one, is that I think it's really interesting that 2 of the big Oscar movies this year, and also 2 of the most talked about movies this past year, were Anora and The Substance, which are both films about women. They both have female leads, and they're both kind of about what it is to be a woman. The Substance was made by a female director.
I should see that then. I really should see it, I guess. It's a horror film to me, and I'm not really a big fan of horror films.
Yeah, it's hard for me to recommend it to you because it is pretty gory at parts. But yeah, so the Substance was made by Coralie Farjat. I might not be pronouncing that correctly. And Anora was made by a man, Sean Baker. But they're both films about women. And, you know, I guess you could argue that The Substance it was made by a female filmmaker, so it is perhaps has more of a female point of view than Anora.
They're about women's experience.
Yes, they're literally about female characters, and they are also both very specifically about female experience. And on the one hand, I think that is a positive thing, because so few of the Oscar-winning films from history are about women or about female experience. So few of them are made by women. So it feels like in some ways that's a step forward. On the other hand, I cannot help but notice that both of these films are about women whose entire job is to appeal visually to men. Literally. Like, The Substance is about a woman who does this aerobic workout video series. It's sort of unclear. It seems like it's on a television show, but she does this aerobic workout series, and she's very beautiful, and she, is wearing the crazy, like, 80s style Lycra unitard, and she gets replaced by a younger version of herself, literally, who does the same thing in a much more sexualized manner. And there are many scenes of the younger version of herself doing the show, and it kind of looks like you're watching pornography. She literally does these kind of pornographic poses.
So it's almost like both these films are about the sexualization of women as well.
Yes, for sure. And The Substance is definitely specifically about what that does to a woman's psyche. You know, it's specifically about a woman internalizing that and enacting those beauty standards on herself. Anora kind of isn't really about the internalization of that. It's more about how this woman ends up getting used by men and does find out, she comes out not unscathed, but she doesn't get destroyed by the process. I mean, if you compare the endings, Anora definitely has a more upbeat ending in that our protagonist cries at the end, but she lives to see another day. She doesn't triumph, but she did make a bunch of money. So, but both of these are about women whose job is to be visually appealing, in particular to men, and they're kind of about different sides of that. And I thought they had interestingly similar approaches to their main characters, where their main characters both seemed a little bit opaque to me. I don't really feel like I understand Anora's internal self really at all until the very end. And in The Substance, it just feels like the main character, her only interiority is her reaction to people finding or not finding her beautiful. It's all about this obsession with looking younger and not wanting to age. And that in itself is a complex thing. It's not always just about gender. It is also a little bit about our fear of death, because as we get older, that is us moving closer to death. Everybody dies. We're all headed that way, and we're all afraid of it. And for some of us, looking in the mirror and seeing the visual signs of that is a complex issue, and sometimes terrifying and sometimes not. And certainly The Substance is tackling that to an extent. It was just very weird to me that it felt like the main character had no interiority or personal life outside of that, which I do think the film is trying to be a bit of a parable. So I think that's an intentional choice. It's stripping the story down to its most basic component. It reminded me a lot of old episodes of The Twilight Zone, where these characters are essentially stripped down to one bad choice, the one thing that kind of haunts them the most, and it feels like they sort of don't have personhood outside of that. And that can be interesting, and I will say, I thought the last 20 minutes or so of The Substance gets so crazy that it's a very fun ride for me.
Okay. All right. Maybe I will watch it.
I mean, again, it is kind of gory. I wasn't bothered by the gore because I found it cartoonish.
Okay.
I didn't find it viscerally disturbing. I mostly found it funny. On the other hand, I do also think there are a number of shots in The Substance that I have very mixed feelings about, because they are basically, what is the term? Jump scares, where the jump scare is looking at a very old woman's body, because after the change happens, Demi Moore's older persona starts to rapidly age and becomes kind of grotesque, but it's not that different from just looking at a very old person. She's definitely a little bit more deformed, but not crazy more deformed. So I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. You know, on the one hand, I think there's definitely a truth that the substance is getting at. On the other hand, I think it's kind of a bummer that there are jump scares where basically the scary thing is, look at this old woman's body. That's not really a positive contribution in my mind.
No, it's not.
Anyway, to wrap all of these kind of meandering thoughts up, in some ways it's good that two of the biggest most talked about movies this past year were Anora and the Substance, and they're both about women. It feels very telling to me that they both feel kind of like cautionary tales about women whose entire job is appealing to the male gaze, and how they both kind of get screwed over in different ways by doing that. I do agree with that messaging. I do think that we as women need to understand that we cannot rely on men alone to supply everything for us, and that at the end of the day, making our whole lives about appealing to male-decided beauty standards is not going to work out for us. Beauty does not last forever, and buying into these beauty standards is a way of buying into the patriarchy and allowing men to hold all of the real power. Because beauty is ephemeral and the standards are constantly changing, and that's the whole point. The standards are constantly changing so that women can never actually use their beauty to get ahead permanently. It is not a real hold on real power. What we need is equality, not to constantly form ourselves into this male-decided beauty standard.
I'm not sure I would say that beauty doesn't last forever. I think it's youth that doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
Beauty changes and adapts. And, you know,
I more meant
beautiful in their youth.
The beauty standard, which is not a standard that I really agree with, but it is out there, you know.
But we do age, and especially in the modern age, women have been made to feel that they're not as good as they were when they get older.
Yes.
And instead of growing into who they are and accepting the age spots and the wrinkles and the thinning hair, and I'm talking about stuff that I know about. So instead of accepting that and seeing the beauty that is still there and how it's changed, we're made to be very fearful.
Yeah.
Of aging, and that's just a shame.
Yeah,
because then you don't get to you're gonna the alternative is to die. So if you don't age, you don't get to enjoy those years in your life. And I don't know, it's real frustrating for me. But I agree. I think that both. It sounds like I didn't see The Substance. I can't really speak to it, but it does sound like that they both speak about women's experience, and that's a good thing. And it sounds like you liked The Substance better than Anora. And it was made by a woman, which I wonder if that has something to do with that.
Gosh, did I like The Substance more than I liked Anora? It's hard to say. I definitely enjoyed the ending of The Substance a lot more. I mean, they're both difficult to watch in different ways. I spent a lot of Anora just wishing that I could grab the main character by her shoulders and be like, this man does not care about you, and you do not want this life. This is going to get old so fast. But with The Substance, I really felt like grabbing Demi Moore by the shoulders and being like, you are so gorgeous. Retire and travel the world. You could have so much. You could have so much. And you are so obsessed with how you look, even though you're so beautiful. And so they were both frustrating in different ways. I think the sad thing is that they're both really relevant. The sad thing is that as a culture, we have not moved past the message of either of these movies. And that's depressing to me personally, because I sort of wish we could. I wish we could live in a world where women understood that aging does not ruin your beauty, and that living your whole life for male attention and male approval is never going to make you happy.
Then we have to create a world that isn't run by men.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to, because men like that, I'm trying to not generalize here, but the men who are in control of the world,
the Elon Musks of the world,
the Elon Musk, the men who run the movie studios and the modeling agencies, and men still run more big corporations than women do. Men make the decisions about everything. They still run the world, and until that changes, women are going to be subject to those standards. We can push back against it, but they're still going to be there. Yeah. And these two films, I have one hot take. Well, I have a couple. So, and I said this to you before we started, but it's funny to me because I didn't realize until I saw this movie that a lap dance is basically simulated sex without without penetration. And I had no idea. I mean, until I'd never seen one, I guess. And so I'm watching this and I'm like, I mean, she's literally pretending to have sex with him when she's sitting on his lap. So what is the point of that? And aren't these men frustrated? I mean,
strip clubs have always been a very weird place to me. And I guess, I don't know, full disclosure, in my 20s, I live in Seattle. One of the kind of strip club capitals of the United States is Portland. Seattle itself for a long time had a very minimal strip club scene because there was this old law in the books that strip clubs could not serve alcohol. So most people in Seattle don't go to strip clubs in Seattle. That law has since gone away, and I don't know how that has changed the strip club scene in Seattle because I'm over 30 and I do not care for going to strip clubs anymore. The only pole I want to see is the pole in my classroom. Well, actually, to be fair, I do still like a good burlesque show. I like the kind of the more artistic side of pole.
I love burlesque. That's a very different thing, though, I think.
Yeah. But in my 20s, I did used to go on trips to Portland to go to strip clubs sometimes. And I will say, I said, I prefer the artistic side. There are some really talented pole dancers in these strip clubs in Portland who do
I can see that.
Very artistic, very cool dances, and that was part of what I liked about it. But what I didn't like was all of the weird sexually frustrated men who were hanging out in the audience. I mean, I usually went with a group of friends who would include women, so I never personally felt unsafe because I was always with, if we're bothering to go to Portland, we're going to go with a group of like 10 people. So we're always in this group that makes me feel very safe. And I liked seeing these cool, super athletic dances that these strippers do. But the weird downside to it is that, there are a lot of like men there either by themselves or with other groups of men. And there was always this question in my mind of like, I'm here as a woman who is enjoying the athleticism and the artistry on display, but, I'm looking around at all these men who are clearly sexually into it. It has always been very confusing to me because, you're not allowed to masturbate.
Yeah, you said earlier that they're not allowed to do that. So
they're not allowed to masturbate. They're not allowed to touch the women.
Well, I mean, they can stick money in their thongs, but they can't do anything else. Yeah.
My understanding is that some men go there assuming that some proportion of the strippers are willing to be paid to actually have sex with them. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also know that a lot of women who dance at these places are not willing to do that because they find that to be a much more unsafe situation. So I don't know. It's a very strange
place.
It's
a very old thing. I mean, strip clubs have been around, for probably a century.
Yeah.
It's an old thing and it is still very popular. I don't understand it, but I'm not a man, so I'm gonna let it go. Anyway, so my final hot take is the title of the movie I think is really important, and yet it's frustrating because if the movie is titled Anora, we should know more about Anora. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that Igor at one point at the end says, she keeps correcting people. Her name isn't Anora, it's Annie.
It's Annie.
She goes by Annie. And he tells her, no, you should use Anora. It's a beautiful name. And is the director saying that she doesn't use her name because she doesn't want to acknowledge who she is? And that's a valid thing. But why? We don't know anything about Anora, so why put that in there if you're not going to tell us anything about this character? That is very frustrating to me.
Yeah.
So that's my final hot take.
To go along with that point, I also find it frustrating that we see so little of her talking to her female friends. We know she has one. Yeah. Like, we know she lives with her sister and she has her friend Lulu, and there are brief scenes of her talking to them, but almost no real exchange with her sister, just the bare basics. And with Lulu, the only thing we really see her talking about, there's a scene where they talk about their nails and then and the like tattoos that they have, and then there's a scene where they're going to a party at Vanya's, and Anora is basically just hyping up how cool Vanya's mansion is. And that's it. At no point do they talk about their hopes and dreams or the films that they like or books that they've read or like anything other than what is happening in that moment. And I do think that the film does a good job of portraying that Anora is very smart. She is a great saleswoman. She's good at her job. She understands what men want, and she knows how to give it to them. She knows how to keep herself safe. I have a lot of respect for her. I just wish that I knew who she was beyond this professional capacity. In that scene where she's with Vanya and he's playing video games and ignoring her, and she's just kind of cuddling on him, I'm just like, what is going on in your head? What are you thinking about? Do you think that this is what you want to do forever? It's around the time where she agrees to marry him. And I'm just like, I understand that you have been seduced by the wealth of the situation and that there's a little bit of the pretty woman story happening in your head. But the reality of the situation that you, this very smart person, is experiencing is this immature guy who mostly ignores you unless you are in the middle of having sex, and the only way that you can ever get his attention is by initiating sex, and otherwise he basically just wants you to sit there mutely while he does whatever other thing is gratifying to him in that moment. Is that really what you want forever? You want to live with this guy, this selfish, immature, instant gratification guy forever? Because I tell you what, if it were me, I'd already be bored.
Oh, yeah. And, that first hour of the film where we are so bored and they just keep going with the party scenes, and you talk about the montage. At any point in there, they could have taken 10, 15 minutes out of those ridiculous scenes. I mean, we get the point. After the second or third party scene, we get the point. You don't have to do a fourth or fifth or sixth party scene, which is what they do. Mm-hmm. You could kind of cut some of that out and shown us a little bit about Anora, unless your point is that she's not important enough. And then that kind of defeats the point of your film. If she's really just a principal to you, she's just representative of all women, then you're doing to her what those men are doing to her. Yeah. So we really need to know who she is. If it were me, I would go back and rewrite and re-edit this film and put a little bit more in there about Anora and who she is, what her background is. Did she go to school? Why is her relationship with her sister so combative? I need more from Anora, especially in a film that is named for the character. Why isn't there more about her? So that is my biggest problem with the film, but also that it's just boring. Yeah. For the first, I get the point. I understand why he made it. I appreciate it. I just don't think it's a great film. So it did not deserve the Academy Award for Best Film and all those other awards that it won.
I don't want to say that Mikey Madison didn't deserve her award, because she did carry the film, and she's not responsible for the content of the film. She did put in a really good performance, and I have trouble saying that any one performance is better than another.
Yeah, I see that.
I felt like I did get more out of Demi Moore's performance. That's just me. That's just my personal opinion. And that doesn't mean that it was a better performance, because they were doing different things. And, we've talked before about how, like, the Oscars are a good thing to start conversations, but I do kind of have a problem with the whole concept of deciding what the best film was.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, and I agree with that. And I say this all the time. Every year when Oscar season comes around and I talk about it or write about it, I start off by saying, not everybody loves award shows, but the point about award shows is they get us talking. They get us talking about the films, about artistry, about writing, about the concepts in these films. That's why they're important, and the Oscars kind of force us to do that. And it's not just the Oscars. There's a lot of awards, literary awards, music awards. They all get us talking, and I think it does work. And, people, even if they hate the Oscars and don't watch them, they talk about the movies that were nominated, and that's a good thing.
I've had to accept a while ago that my favorite movies of the year are never going to be the Oscar winners. My favorite movies of 2024 were Love Lies Bleeding and I Saw the TV Glow. I think those were the two best films of the year, and they weren't nominated for anything. And I didn't expect them to be, because they're weirder than what Hollywood wants. They're both very queer films about queer experiences, and they're kind of uncompromisingly about those experiences and very in your face, and neither one of them is really going to appeal to a heterosexual man at all. So of course they're never going to get any Oscars love. Probably my partner was the only heterosexual man who watched both of them and enjoyed both of them, So.
Well, yeah, and I would add to that 2024 overall was kind of a a letdown in terms of movies.
I do agree. Yeah.
And television, too. There wasn't a lot of great streaming television, at least in my opinion. I didn't see a whole lot that I really loved.
Yeah.
As opposed to the year before. 2023 was just an amazing year for both film and television. There were a lot of really good films, a lot of groundbreaking streaming television, and 2024 was a real letdown in comparison to that.
And, some of that could be the after effects of the writer's strike. It could just be
that it could be.
Just fewer things happened because of that. So
yeah, I agree with that. There were a lot of independent films that were good. And I really do think you really need to see more independent films, people.
Yeah, for sure.
You got to see more foreign films. If there's a film festival in your community and you're disgusted with what Hollywood's putting out, you got to go to those film festivals because that's where you're going to see the really good work being done. We got to wrap it up, people. Okay, so that, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women in movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, or you can follow me on Threads at author.tess.adair. If you would like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth.
And I'm Beth Von Baron. You can sign up for my weekly Substack, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at STL_writer_Beth, and on Blue Sky at STLWriterbeth.bsky.social. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks. See you then.